Wisdom of
Okay,
Solomon.
back up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Wisdom of Solomon.
For it.
Go for it.
For they reasoned unsoundly, saying to themselves, "Short and sorrowful is our life, and there is no remedy when a life comes to its end, and no one has been known to return from Hades. For we were born by mere chance, and hereafter we shall be as though we had never been. For the breath in our nostrils is smoke, and reason is a spark kindled by the beating of our hearts. When it is extinguished, the body will turn to ashes, and the spirit will dissolve like empty air. Our name will be forgotten in time, and no one will remember our works. Our life will pass away like the traces of a cloud, and be scattered like mist that is chased by the rays of the sun and overcome by its heat. For our allotted time is the passing of a shadow, and there is no return from our death, because it is sealed up and no one turns back. Come, therefore, let us enjoy the good things that exist, and make use of the creation to the full as in youth. Let us take our fill of costly wine and perfumes, and let no flower of spring pass us by. Let us crown ourselves with rosebuds before they wither. Let none of us fail to share in our revelry. Everywhere let us leave signs of enjoyment, because this is our portion and this is our lot. Let us oppress the righteous poor man, and let us not spare the widow, or regard the gray hairs of the aged, but let our might be our law of right, for what is weak proves itself to be useless. Let us lie in wait for the righteous man, because he is inconvenient to us and opposes our actions. He reproaches us for sins against the law and accuses us of sins against our training. He professes to have knowledge of God and calls himself a child of the Lord. He became to us a reproof of our thoughts. The very sight of him is a burden to us, because his manner of life is unlike that of others, and his ways are strange. We are considered by him as something base, and he avoids our ways as unclean. He calls the last end of the righteous happy, and boasts that God is his Father. Let us see if his words are true, and let us test what will happen at the end of his life. For if the righteous man is God's child, he will help him, and will deliver him from the hand of his adversaries. Let us test him with insult and torture, so that we may find out how gentle he is, and make trial of his forbearance. Let us condemn him to a shameful death, for according to what he says, he will be protected. Thus they reasoned, but they were led astray, for their wickedness blinded them, and they did not know the secret purposes of God, nor hoped for the wages of holiness, nor discerned the price for blameless souls. For God created us for incorruption, and made us in the image of his own eternity. But through the devil's envy, death entered the world, and those who belong to his company experience it.
Okay.
That ought to be part of the liturgy.
That's
Yeah.
kind of weird.
What is this about in verse 10? Let us oppress the righteous poor man.
Yeah,
Let us not spare the widow.
I don't understand
It's really
what's
down there.
happening.
Well, so down with the poor and honest man. Let us tread. Well, who's saying that?
I'm not sure.
It's saying that people who have not encountered wisdom, these are people who are pessimists. Let's down with the poor and the honest man.
And the first part was kind of depressing too.
Yes, yes.
Just kinda.
Kind of.
Not used at a funeral.
Yeah. Down when you get near 17, so let us test the truth of his words. Let us see what will happen to him in the end. For if the just man is God's son, God will stretch out his hand to him and save him from the clutches of his enemies. So, this is kind of like the the centurions at the foot of the cross. If he's truly God's son, let him come and take him down. So, we're saying, this is not happy stuff. You're not going to find this in the burial of the dead literature.
I just saw there's a paragraph title in this version. It says, "Life as the ungodly see it."
Yes.
So that would explain
Yeah.
the whole.
It's how people who have not experienced wisdom see life. These are the pessimists.
Okay.
And, as you get down to 21, so they argue, and the very wrong they were, blinded by their own bad stuff. They did not understand God's hidden plan. They never expected holiness of life would have its recompense. They thought that innocence had no reward. But God created man for immortality and made him the image of his own eternal self. It was the devil's spite that brought death into the world, and the experience is reserved for those who take his side. Now, an interesting thing there. How often have we heard the devil referred to in the Old Testament? There really was no concept of the devil making people do stuff. Was it the devil that made people say, we would be better off going back to Egypt because we could have food and water there? Moses didn't say, well, the devil's making you say that. See, back then, people were responsible for their own, what they did wrong. But now, we have this introduction. As wisdom starts growing, we start finding this fight between good and evil. This is kind of like some of Plato's early writings, where, man was in his purest form, but there were those who said man was not pure. And, the early philosophers argued, what's man's relationship to the world? At that time, philosophy and theology were really very close. We all have those questions today. Why am I here? What is my goal? Where was I before I was here? What is the significance of my life? That's the same thing that early philosophers were debating. And, some of their debates and disagreements were as ridiculous as some of the Christian stuff. I remember one philosopher, I can't think who it was now, but he said that an arrow, if you shoot an arrow, it really doesn't go anywhere. It goes through a series of dots. In time, if you stop it, there's a dot. There is no line from a dot. So then it moves to the next dot, and the next dot. And he was able to extrapolate that if you follow that logic, the arrow never really flies. I remember that was,
Very convoluted, isn't it?
yeah, when I was studying philosophy, I remember saying to the instructor when we were discussing this, I said, well, why does somebody who gets hit by the arrow die? If the arrow doesn't move, why shoot it? But philosophy at that time, people were trying to figure stuff out. And that was, one of the solutions. He did not become a great philosopher because people understood the arrow still flew in the air. So, we have this sentiment that the unbeliever feels this is the way man, nihilism. Everything is bad. And we've all met at one time or another in our lives people who have never had a good day.
Yeah.
And, they just, it's hard to get through to those people that life is not that bad. If you keep looking for the bad stuff, guess what you're going to get?
Yeah.
And this was the message from the early Christians, in Jesus. Don't keep looking for the bad stuff. There's good stuff in there. Remember, there's a poster that somebody used to quote to me, which I really liked. It said, "I was waiting at the airport when my ship came in."
Yeah.
That's kind of, like these people here. They're saying, life sucks. And if you say that enough, guess what? Your life sucks.
So is
So,
it gonna get a little better here before we go home? Or we're
well, I
gonna be
hope so.
dismal all week, so.
Well, let's see. Barbara, make us happy.
Okay. The destiny of the righteous. But the souls of the righteous are in the hand of God, and no torment will ever touch them. In the eyes of the foolish they seemed to have died, and their departure was thought to be a disaster, and their going from us to be their destruction. But they are at peace. For though in the sight of others they were punished, their hope is full of immortality. Having been disciplined a little, they will receive great good, because God tested them and found them worthy of himself. Like gold in the furnace, he tried them, and like a sacrificial burnt offering, he accepted them. In the time of their visitation, they will shine forth, and will run like sparks through the stubble. They will govern nations and rule over peoples, and the Lord will reign over them forever. Those who trust in him will understand truth, and the faithful will abide with him in love, because grace and mercy are upon his holy ones, and
Okay,
he watches over his elect.
good. I applaud you there. Make you feel better, Bob?
I now realize why we didn't do chapter 2 last week, and then go home.
Yeah, that was not a good chapter to end on. But now we're in something that's a little uplifting. And that's a passage that's sometimes read during funerals. The souls of the just are in God's hand, and torment shall not touch them. For the eyes of the foolish men, they seem to be dead. Their departure was reckoned as defeat, and their going from us a disaster. But they are at peace, for though in the sight of men they may be punished, they have a sure hope of immortality, and a little chastisement, and they will receive. God has tested them and found them to be worthy to be his. So we have here a glimpse of an afterlife. Again, not Jewish thought. Remember, this was written in Greek between the 1st century before Christ and the 1st century after Christ. So, now we're seeing a little bit of input into the resurrection through the wisdom of Solomon. And, he's saying, you might get tested a little bit, but you'll survive. You're God's. I mean, that's a great passage for somebody going to college. You might get tested, but you'll still graduate. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure Bob heard the good news.
Well, I was getting ready to pick out some passages to recommend for my service out of that first.
Out of chapter 2?
After chapter 2, pick out a couple passages there for them to read in my service.
Well, move to 3.
Okay. Oh, did I read 10?
You're just
No,
starting at 2.
just start.
Okay. But the ungodly will be punished as their reasoning deserves. Those who disregarded the righteous and rebelled against the Lord, for those who despise wisdom and instruction are miserable. Their hope is vain, their labors are unprofitable, and their works are useless. Their wives are foolish, and their children evil. Their offspring are accursed. For blessed is the barren womb who is undefiled, who has not entered into a sinful union. She will have fruit when God examines souls. Blessed also is the eunuch whose hands have done no lawless deed, and who has not devised wicked things against the Lord. For special favor will be shown him for his faithfulness, and a place of great delight in the temple of the Lord. For the fruit of good labors is renowned, and the root of understanding does not fail. But children of adulterers will not come to maturity, and the offspring of an unlawful union will perish. Even if they live long, they will be held of no account, and finally their old age will be without honor. If they die young, they will have no hope and no consolation on the day of judgment. For the end of an unrighteous generation is grievous. That's the end of 3.
Yes.
4?
No, let's, there are a couple things. The commentary has, I think, an interesting comment. It said that this passage, or chapter 3, recalls Socrates and Plato, quote, when death comes to a man, his mortal part, it appears, dies, but the immortal part goes away unharmed. The hope is great. This is when he drank the poison. After I drink the poison, I shall no longer be with you, but shall go away to the joys of the blessed. That, this...
That was his understanding.
Yes. Which means, you can kill me, but my soul lives on. And in one part he says, so you're bringing me this poison to drink. If I drink it, I die, my soul lives on. But if I'm wrong, I'm just dead. So there is this Greek philosophical thing that death is not the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes very Christian. And you can see why St. Augustine was a follower of Plato, because he really, he emphasized that. But it's amazing that here, in between the intertestamental times, we see a redeveloping of Jewish theology and Christian theology. Remember, the Sadducees believed in resurrection. The Pharisees said, you're dead, you're dead. But the Sadducees said, there is some life after death. And that's why it's interesting, they joined together to get Jesus crucified, but they did not agree. And that's another example of Hebrews, two groups of Jews who disagreed vehemently. One group believed in resurrection, the other group didn't. It's like Jesus, I think it's in Matthew, said, let the dead bury the dead. You're still alive. There are things to do. So, this thinking is new. This is why it's not in the Hebrew Bible. And why we have it in the Apocryphal. That, there is some value here for the edification of people. So, let's get into 4.
Okay. Better than this is childlessness with virtue, For in the memory of virtue is immortality, because it is known both by God and by mortals. When it is present, people imitate it, and they long for it when it has gone. Throughout all time it marches, crowned in triumph, victor in the contest for prizes that are undefiled. But the prolific brood of the ungodly will be of no use, and none of their illegitimate seedlings will strike a deep root or take a firm hold. For even if they put forth boughs for a while, standing insecurely they will be shaken by the wind, and by the violence of the winds they will be uprooted. The branches will be broken off before they come to maturity, and their fruit will be useless, not ripe enough to eat and good for nothing. For children born of unlawful unions are witnesses of evil against their parents when God examines them. But the righteous, though they die early, will be at rest. For old age is not honored for length of time or measured by number of years, but understanding is gray hair for anyone, and a blameless life is ripe old age. There were some who pleased God and were loved by him, and while living among sinners were taken up. They were caught up so that evil might not change their understanding, or guile deceive their souls. For the fascination of wickedness obscures what is good, and roving desire perverts the innocent mind. Being perfected in a short time, they fulfilled long years, for their souls were pleasing to the Lord. Therefore he took them quickly from the midst of wickedness. Yet the people saw and did not understand or take such a thing to heart, that God's grace and mercy are with us, with his elect, and that he watches over his holy ones. The righteous who have died will condemn the ungodly who are living, and youth that is quickly perfected will condemn the prolonged old age of the unrighteous. For they will see the end of the wise, and will not understand what the Lord purposed for them, for what he kept them safe. The unrighteous will see and will have contempt for them, but the Lord will laugh them to scorn. After this they will become dishonored corpses, and an outrage among the dead forever, because he will dash them speechless to the ground, and shake them from the foundations. They will be left utterly dry and barren, and they will suffer anguish, and the memory of them will perish. They will come with dread when their sins are reckoned up, and their lawless deeds will convict them to their face.
Wow. We're still picking on the ungodly. My translation, where was that? Verse 7 and 8 in my translation say, we roam to our heart's content along the paths of wickedness and ruin, wandering through trackless deserts and ignoring the Lord's highway. What good has our pride done us? What can we show for all our wealth and arrogance? All those things have passed like a shadow, like a messenger galloping by, like a ship that runs through the surging sea, and when she has passed, not a trace of her is to be found. Now, you can see why Luther had a little bit of problem with this, because it's kind of saying, maybe indirectly, although I think it's kind of direct, people who do good get God's favor. The bad people don't. And you can see Luther's problem, justification by faith. Now, why isn't faith mentioned in here? Jesus was not a player at this point. I mean, if this was written in the 1st century BC, no one knew who Jesus was. And if it's in the 2nd century, or the 1st century AD, the story may not have traveled enough that Jesus was there. Because they do make reference to resurrection, especially in chapter 3, that you live on. But they're not talking about living on in terms of resurrection. And when we think of the resurrection, we think of the body being resurrected. Remember what Jesus said when Mary saw him outside the tomb. What did Jesus say to Mary? Do not touch me. I have not risen to the Father. So, to me, when I think of that, it's kind of like he was an apparition. A ghost, if you will. Because he had not gone up. Now, from John's Gospel, he goes up to when Thomas shows up in the upper room, Jesus said, touch my hands, touch my side. Well, he hasn't risen to the Father yet then. So there's two interpretations. Can you believe that the Christian church has conflicting stories?
Go figure, huh? Go figure, huh?
Yeah. I mean, they're just messing with us.
Well,
So-
the Jews weren't expecting Jesus anyway, so that they wouldn't write that into the philosophy.
No, and Jesus, they were waiting for a Messiah. And even if they knew Jesus, he wasn't the Messiah that they were looking for.
Messiah being a warrior that would
Yeah, they wanted someone.
vanquish the Romans.
Yes. I mean, I would imagine if you talk to the leaders of the Jewish groups at that time, they would say the real Messiah is going to rebuild the temple. It's now been destroyed. The Romans destroyed it for the second time. And so the real Messiah is going to rebuild the temple. Remember, the temple was always the most holy place for them. I mean, no matter where you lived, you traveled to the temple to do penance, to do your sacrifice. Now we travel to Fatima or light a candle in the church. So, anyway, I think this is really interesting. I mean,
It is very good.
there's stuff in here that,
Makes you think.
yeah, there's stuff that's comforting.
I have questions.
As long as they don't end up with chapter 2.
Yeah, there's stuff that's comforting, but there's stuff that's challenging, and that's the way faith is.
Yeah.
You can see how the church has struggled trying, can you imagine sitting in one of those great councils when they're deciding what books do we put in the Bible? I mean, that just had to be one heck of a battle. Because bishops like to think they're godly. But let me tell you, I've seen some bishops arguing, and it's anything but godly. So, here we're struggling. And you can see why the church has struggled as much as it has. And you can see why the Jews were like us. There were different groups who had different opinions. And, if you had the Near East Jews arguing with the Spanish Jews, and you can see how, I'm going to go back to the Jews again, but the Mideast Jews, their influence was there in the Middle East. The Spanish Jews, where else were they influenced by? Well, the Arabs came in and conquered Spain, conquered Portugal. And so there was always that brush of Arab theology, tradition. I think some of the most beautiful church services I've heard were services that were done in Spain, Mozambique. I heard I had a record at one time, Mozambique Mass. And it's Christian, but that Arab music influences it. And they're not doing the dance of the seven veils, but it does put a nice, interesting twist on the service. So, and then those who were in North Africa, they were influenced by Africa, Ethiopia.
The Jews had all the dissension before Facebook.
Yes, they did. All right, we'll pick up with chapter 6. Thankfully, we've ended on a chapter that we weren't going to go home and put a gun in our mouth.
Thank you.
All right.
Rewrite our funeral.
Yeah.